Evening. Welcome to our Bible study. Come on in. We got some more people joining us. Good evening, Karen. Good evening, Cindy. Good to see you guys joining us online. I tell you what, we've had some really good interactions. Come on down, get comfortable. We're going to be picking up in about 2 Samuel 16:15. In there, we're going to do a little bit of a review, and then we'll get started with it. Just some information update. I have now the ability and got it started to where all of the classes are going to be converted into a podcast. And so if you received an email that showed that link, if you click on it, you can go to the Podbean site, and it will then subscribe. There's 2 up there right now. One of them they're both kind of tests. But what's really great about it is the one that we actually are going to use all the time to stream with. The recording was so much better. So it should take very little effort, and we'll be able to load those up there so people can subscribe and eventually get them out even more formats on the classes, as well as Fridays, of course. So that I'm excited. As well, you see on your screen there's a little, they call QR code up on your screen. If you're in the auditorium, I don't think you're going to be able to click on it. But if you take your phone and you click on that on your TV screen, it'll take you to Podbean, to our site, and be able to then subscribe. And so tonight, after this is over, or in the morning, I'm getting one audio recording straight and pure, so I'll be able to load them up, separate it out. So I'm excited about it. Give that ability for people to listen to it. And they're driving around or doing anything, they can listen if they want to. And of course, if we have some videos like we're going to have tonight, I actually have a video tonight, you'll be able to hear the video. You won't be able to necessarily see all the graphics, but that's a con. But it's okay. You can still listen to it. There's some good information on them. So continuing in the life of David, it's exciting to look at this point. It's kind of a very tragic story. I call it the Bible's example of the bad boy. I mean, there's a lot of great examples like Joseph, and then you got Absalom. And it's really good because there's a lot of things we can draw through it. I'm going to change up my pace and the way I'm doing things so we can get through a little bit of this. If you want to, I encourage you, of course, go through and read on your own and read more detail. But we're going to do some reading, but I want to go through it. So we're going to go ahead and watch this. It's like right at 10 minutes, or no, I don't even think it's even that long. But it's neat because it'll catch us up and pull you in if you haven't been joining us, and start from the story of Absalom and give you some background and then bring it all the way past and the ending of it. So let's go ahead and try to get that going without any problems. I think it'll work.
Absalom rebels against King David. David had several sons by different wives. Absalom was his third oldest son. David's oldest son was called Amnon. Absalom's mother was the daughter of the king of Geshur. Absalom also had a sister called Tamar. There was big trouble in the family when Amnon raped Tamar. When Absalom found out what had happened to his sister, he plotted revenge against Amnon. 2 years later, Absalom got his servants to get Amnon drunk and then murdered him. King David mourned many days for his oldest son. Absalom fled to hide in the land of Geshur for the next 3 years. David, although longing to see Absalom again, could not forgive him. Joab, the commander of David's army, tried to resolve the problem by inviting a wise woman to see David. The woman arrived dressed as a widow in mourning clothes. "I had 2 sons," she explained, "but they got into a fight and one killed the other. Now everyone is saying, hand over the son who murdered so we can put him to death for taking the life of his brother. This son is all I have. Go home and I will issue an order to stop them killing your son," David said. The wise woman then said, "When the king says this, does he not convict himself, for the king has not brought back his banished son?" Later, David summoned Absalom to come back to Jerusalem, but he would not see him. Sometime later, the king did send for Absalom. When he arrived, he bowed face down before his father, who kissed him. Now that he was back in Jerusalem, he became very arrogant. He provided for himself a chariot, horses, and 50 men to run ahead of him. Now everyone praised him for his handsome appearance. Absalom was particularly proud of his hair, which he cut once a year. The weight of the cut hair was 200 shekels, 2.2 kilograms or 5 pounds. Absalom would sit by the city gate to meet those coming to see the king for a judgment. He would say, "I can see that you are right in this matter. It is a shame the king doesn't have anyone to assist him in hearing these cases. If I were the judge, then anyone with a lawsuit could come to me, and I would give him justice." And when someone came to bow to him, Absalom wouldn't let him, but shook his hand instead. In doing this, Absalom became very popular with the people of Israel. After 4 years of winning over the people, Absalom began to plot to become king instead of his father David. He went to the king and asked permission to go to Hebron to keep a promise he had made with God to make a sacrifice to him for bringing him back from Geshur. David gave him permission to go. Absalom and 200 of his guests went to Hebron. When he got there, he sent messengers to every part of Israel to announce, "As soon as you hear the trumpets, you will know that Absalom has been crowned in Hebron." Men started gathering to support Absalom's rebellion. Ahithophel, one of David's trusted counselors, declared his support for Absalom. Absalom and his rebel army started marching towards Jerusalem. A messenger soon arrived in Jerusalem to tell King David, "All Israel has joined Absalom in a conspiracy against you." David decided to flee the city. There was deep sadness in the city as the king went forth, with much of his household and 600 loyal troops. The king left 10 women, who were concubines, to keep the palace. His head and feet were covered as a sign of mourning, and he wept as he walked away. The people with him covered their heads and wept also. Meanwhile, Absalom said to Ahithophel, David's former advisor, "Give me your counsel. What shall we do?" "Go into your father's concubines that he has left to keep the palace," Ahithophel replied. "When all Israel hear that you have become a stench to your father, then the hands of all who are with you will be strong." So they spread a tent for Absalom on the top of the palace, and Absalom went in to his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Then Ahithophel urged him to pursue David while he was weary and discouraged. However, David had left a loyal advisor called Hushai in Jerusalem to give Absalom poor advice. Hushai told Absalom not to pursue David immediately as he was a great fighter and there were mighty warriors with him. Absalom listened to Hushai's advice and David had time to make his escape. Ahithophel recognized that Hushai had outwitted him, foresaw the disastrous defeat of Absalom's forces and took his own life. David made it to Mahanaim, where people brought him provisions. He organized his army under the command of Joab, Abishai and Ittai. They insisted David not go into battle with them. Absalom and his troops advanced to find David, and a battle had broken out in the forest of Ephraim. The battle raged throughout the forest and 20,000 men were killed. During the battle, Absalom came across some of David's troops and fled on a mule. As the mule went beneath the thick boughs of a great oak tree, Absalom's hair got caught in the branches. His mule went on, leaving him dangling in the air. One of David's men saw him and told Joab. Joab asked the soldier why he had not killed Absalom. "We all heard the king say to you and Abishai and Ittai, 'For my sake, please don't harm young Absalom,'" the soldier replied. "Enough of this," Joab said. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into the heart of Absalom as he dangled from the oak tree. Afterward, they threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled stones on top of it. Upon hearing about his death, Absalom's army fled to their homes. A messenger arrived and said to David, "Blessed be the Lord your God who has destroyed the rebels who dared to stand against you." "What of Absalom, my son?" the king demanded to know. "Is he all right?" "May all of your enemies be as that young man was," the messenger replied. Upon hearing the news, the king burst into tears, and went up to his room wailing, "Oh my son Absalom! My son Absalom! If only I could have died for you." When the people heard of the king's deep grief for his son, the joy of victory quickly turned into deep sadness. David would later return to Jerusalem to again reign as king of Israel.
So that's fast. Oh, let me turn the lights back on. I know we have some people that are joining us, and somebody was asking, they were saying, "Well, I haven't been with you in the whole class, and it is kind of, as we're going through the whole life, if you're joining in and you feel like you're lost, and there's enough within each class I think you can follow." And I like the idea that I found this, and I thought, wow, this really just brings it together from the start all the way through, actually, to the finish. Some things that have been brought up about Absalom that I think are important right away is his arrogance. He is arrogant from the bottom of his foot to the top of his head. And that's something that's described of him, and can't help but think of comparing him to King Saul. When you think about King Saul, that's the exact type of a description. You have one good-looking man that looked like a leader, looked like somebody they wanted to represent them, and turned out to be horrible. And that's when, God chose a man that was after his heart, a man from the inside, not the outside. And then here we have Absalom. Absalom is a product of his environment, though. Let's not forget about that. So,
But that's not an excuse.
no, there's we always talk about there's environment, and then there's
Choices.
the type of nurture. Everybody is in situations, and I thought of that too. There's really no excuse. Chelsea, hi. If I do that, that's because somebody responded on chat. So I'm engaging with that. So if I just stop and say hi, you guys in here are going to go, what's he doing? Yeah, it's the voices in my head. But, right. But the environment in which David is allowed to be created has also set forward some of these consequences. And I don't cut either one of them slack. We really have been beaten up, David as well, about this, and we're going to look at the end of the class, I hope to look at some lessons between the two, from the son to the father's side, some things that we can bring home for ourselves as parents. But Absalom was created within an environment where it allowed him, but it doesn't give him any, you're right, justification for going forward. And that's what we'll look at very specifically when we get towards the end of this, because as he comes in, he seems to be successful as he's been able to carry out this plot. He's been able to rally people and deceptively been able to keep it quiet enough to where David either had his head in the sand like an ostrich, or Absalom did a good job of keeping this a lot quieter than what we imagined. A lot that I read about and studied seemed to think that he was extremely deceptive, which I think it does kind of fit his personality. We go back all the way to Ammon when he killed him, and all that conniving and coaching to allow him to take the brothers down to the feast, and then killing his brother and all those things. So I think that's justified, a characteristic that he's very deceptive. He's very vengeful. And he's going to be, and he's been rebellious all the way through. So those three things he has had within his character of all the environments that he's living in. And at any time, those could have stopped. Those are not genetic or medical conditions. They're things in which he should have been able to stop. But now, we've already talked about the way David exited, and he left Jerusalem, and all those engagements and all those conversations. And one of those in there, when he's talking to the man who came out and cursed him and was throwing rocks at him and yelling at him, and his mighty men were saying, hey, let's kill this dog. And God, David takes it. He takes it on the chin in a way. He just kind of like, well, maybe this is from God. And within that, what he was saying to David, there is some truth in it. He was blaming David for the death of Saul, that somehow it's all Saul's fault, and that the blood of Saul is on David. No, it's not. It's on David. It's on Saul. It's on his own head. And it was the Philistines that killed him. If you'll recall, David was way south. God got him out of the picture. But in that, he does say, you have blood on your hands, and there are some things, and that what's happening to you is because of your evil. And I think that pierced him. Even though he understood that, okay, I'm not responsible for Saul, but we can see this heart of David that was pierced, and understanding that there is a part of this that I'm responsible for. Why did David leave Jerusalem? And I really do think that the more I've looked at this, and we've been going over it for a while, is I think it was strategy. I think it was strategic. I think the more and more I think of it, yeah, there's a part where you could say he's given up, but yeah, the warrior in David, I see a man who knows where he should fight. And fighting in the city is not where he's good at. He's good at being out and doing, kind of a rural type of fighting, not inside of the city. It also will avoid taking the violence and having more violence in the city. So that's a part of it. But what did he do before he left? What would he say? Some things that is going to help him. Do you remember? Some things he did and set in place as he was leaving that's going to help him back in Jerusalem?
I was gonna say that he left some people at his house.
He left some people.
10 concubines and other servants.
He left the concubines. He also sent back the priest,
Yeah.
which was a prophet, well-respected prophet. He sent the ark back,
Oh, yeah.
and he told him, go back, because you're a seer, aren't you? You're a prophet of God, and you're respected, and I want you to be able to listen. So that's why I think the strategy was pretty strong in what he was going to be able to do, and that's exactly what helps him as we go along here and we look at this. So after, he curses him, we see that as Absalom arrives, I think that this arrival must have terrified people in the city. What's going to happen? But it goes well. The transfer of power actually was very smooth. There was no violence. I mean, we don't have any record anyway that Absalom came in and just started executing people and doing a loyalty test. But we know that loyalty was important to Absalom, because Absalom is the way he receives Hushai, who was the priest who came back. We're going to see where he asked, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're my dad's friend. And so let's go ahead and read. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel chapter 16, starting in verse 15. Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom. Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. And Absalom said to Hushai, is your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend? And Hushai said to Absalom, no, for whom the Lord and his people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, whom shall I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. So he's got in, he's accepted, and Absalom is feeling really kind of comfortable. Now his arrogance, the one thing that I see with arrogant people is that they miss a lot of things. They're too proud to consider, and they're too arrogant, and all you got to do is just flatter them, kiss the ring, and then they're like, oh yeah. And that's his problem. So right now, he's sitting on David's throne. He's ruling. He's been declared a king by the priest. He's got the ark of God, which is symbolic of what?
His presence.
Presence of God. Hey, man, I got the presence of God. I got the high priest. I got the city. And he's got the majority of the people. So it looks like maybe this is something ordained, something that God wants to do, wants to put me into place. So now that you have Ahithophel and you have Hushai, that are both very well-respected prophets. Ahithophel is a good friend, and this is a betrayal, a deep betrayal. Remember, whenever David was coming out, he was going up Mount Olives, he finds out that Ahithophel has betrayed him. He kind of curses him. He says, I hope all that he has to say is, comes to ruin. And it kind of is, because now he has his own man on the inside that as well speaks for God. And that means a lot to the people who are listening, so that whenever you listen to your advisors, you're going to listen to people that have been very wise. And both of these men have been close to David, and David has done well with these men. So why would you not listen? So now it's going to be competing, isn't it? Which one to listen to? So let's look at the advice, because when I looked at them again, we know which way they're leaning. Ahithophel, Absalom. Hushai, David. But boy, both of them have some good advice. If I was sitting in his position, and I didn't know that Hushai was really leaning towards David, I wouldn't know. It would be difficult. So let's take a look at those starting in 16:20. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, give your counsel. What shall we do? And Ahithophel said to Absalom, go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house. And all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father. And the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all of Israel. Now in those days, the counsel of Ahithophel was as one consulted of the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and Absalom. So we see that the writer of Samuel here brings up the point that he has good advice. So let's talk about this idea. First, it's not to go and pursue, it's to secure its morale. It's about showing people that you are absolutely in charge. Now, if we jump back to Ishbosheth and Abner, remember the conflict that came up between those two was the fact that Abner was his commanding general. Ishbosheth was the son of Saul, the king. And Abner had put him in as king after Saul was dead, and he was ruling the 10 northern tribes. But Abner all of a sudden gets a little cocky, and he decides he wants one of the concubines of Saul. And he does. He has a relationship with this concubine. And Ishbosheth understands what this means. It's not just, okay, well, it's just a woman. It's just one of the concubines. It's not a wife. You'd think today, I mean, come on, man. He had a bunch of them. What's the big deal? It was a big deal because the culture and the custom was that if somebody had a wife or a concubine of one in power, you were showing equality with that power. So when Ishbosheth saw Abner taking one of the concubines and having a relationship with her, he saw that as a threat, and he was legitimately right to be concerned about it. So now let's jump to this. So that's exactly, if you think about it, what his advice is given to him is Ahithophel says, this is what you need to do. First and foremost is you need to show publicly and demonstrate that you are in charge by taking all of his concubines that he left behind. And he does it. He goes up, they pitch a tent on top of the roof in order that everybody could see that this is what's going on, and he then has a sexual relationship with all of them. Now, you notice that one of the things he says in this advice is that what is the effect that it's going to have? What does he say that the effect's going to have that when he does this?
Isn't it that all Israel will know that he is king?
It's going to confirm that, but it's also going to make you a stench in your father's eyes. That's what the people want to know, that the union's broke, and that if you have done this and did this to all his concubines, then what would be natural is whoever was in power would be incensed, like Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth, when Abner had a relationship with one of the former king's wives, was incensed. And it says there that from that point on, Abner and him broke paths. And the next thing you know, Abner's bringing the 10 northern tribes to David. So that's what, he says, Ahithophel says, this is what's going to do. It's going to demonstrate to everybody publicly, you did it. 2, it's going to demonstrate that you have become something very offensive to your dad. There's no reconciliation. Daddy ain't going to come back into town and you're going to go, oh, hi, Dad. Okay. It's absolute. Declaring your strength. And another point it's going to do is what it's going to do for those that are with him that have taken on this rebellion. Those that are part of the coup. It's going to show to them and strengthen them, he says. It's going to increase the morale of all those that are with him as well. So that, brilliant, honestly. I mean, from that. I knew a guy at NMSU that was when I was in ROTC, and he was there working on his master's degree of social political something, I don't know. But he had worked as a military liaison in an embassy to a country in Africa. He told me this story, and it fits. So he said one night he was a military attaché to the ambassador in this country. And one night he gets a phone call, 2 o'clock in the morning, and he hears all this gunfire going off and everything, and they're telling him, we need you at the president's house now. And so he gets up, he gets his uniform on and gets armed, he goes down there, and a coup had just happened. And he said, I walked into the presidential palace, and I walk in, and he goes, there's the president shot, and his whole family's dead. And these guys are standing around, looking around, they're going, and they looked at me, he said, and they go, what do we do? He's like, whoa, 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 wait a minute, you know? Why are you, I'm not a coup maker. You guys did this. You should know what you're going to do. And he said, man, the first thing he got onto the U.S. ambassador, they called Washington and blah, blah, blah. My point is, those guys had no idea what to do. They had no advisors. That's what made me think of this colonel who told me that. Had been 30-something years ago when he told us that story. So this was probably in the 70s or so when this happened, because it was in the 80s when I met him. But he has some good advisors. And this is very true, that what Ahithophel is telling him to do, he needs to do. And he does. He carries it out.
But to say that he has, it's almost as if he has the oracle of God. God wouldn't be telling somebody to go have relations with all your concubines.
And that's exactly what it also, when the previous verse was, that his word was considered from God, wasn't it?
Right, right.
From both David and Absalom. So, hey, I'm doing what God's telling me. He could have that delusion and believing that, which that's a whole nother story, isn't it? I mean, we can see a lot of people today that they think that they're following a man. Is Ahithophel with God, you think? I don't think so.
No.
So.
Why would he give that advice?
Right. Why would he even be with him? Why would he be encouraging an insurrection against the anointed one? Mm-hmm. David wouldn't even lay a hand on Saul because he was anointed. And David was anointed as well, but he wouldn't even touch Saul. He let God handle it, and God did.
He wouldn't go after his son either.
He didn't go after his son either. And so Ahithophel is not with God. But how do you know this?
Right.
If you're as much caught up in a coup, you don't see it. This is the arrogance, where you're not seeing the fact that this man is not with God. He's not speaking with God. He's got a reputation that he used to, but today he's not. That's the warning we need to have for ourselves today. Look at the whole situation and what's going on. That man could have been falling out from God. And so that's what we see here, is that, yeah, they used to be esteemed. So,
Somebody chatted.
what's that?
Somebody chatted.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I didn't see it up there. I see it down here. Chelsea says, like defiling your father's bed, like the first son of Israel did. Yeah. A stench. I like that word, becomes like a stench, something that just, you can't get rid of that smell, sometimes it's just that bad or something. So, going on, moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged, and throw him into a panic, and all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down the king, and I will bring back the people to you as a bride comes home to her husband. You will seek the life of only one man, and all the people will be at peace. And the advice seemed right in the eyes of Absalom and all the elders of the Israel. Yeah.
Sure it did.
Strike while the iron's hot, right?
And kill my
Don't
father.
let your enemy get a chance to organize.
Yeah, but kill my father.
Kill my father. That's the only one he wants. And so It's a very precise, surgical strike. High target, high value target, right? As we say today, we hear that all the time. You know, you want that one. And so he knows, if I take, that's what you need to do. Right now, we need to go. Give me the men, and look how many men. Give me 12,000. Choose 12,000 men. How many left with David? 600. That's kind of the number, around 600 versus 12,000. And of that, not all of them are warriors. They are some very, very good fighters. Trust me, they're the mighty men of valor. So that, you know, the kill ratio might have been pretty high. These guys could fight. But it's good advice. Strike, throw him off, cause him to panic, and then we'll just be, all the other people will scatter. We'll make peace with them. We'll show that we're not trying to harm anybody. We were just getting that king, and then bring back. And he goes, and I love the way he describes that. He goes, you know, I'll bring them back as a bride comes home to her husband. What a sweet reunion. Only one life. So it does seem right in the eyes of, now notice the elders of Israel, these are representative of the tribes. So these are the men that, you know, are the elder men of the tribe of Israel. They're there with him in Jerusalem. So they also see that as something as wise. And remember, again, they're trusting him as he's speaking for God. So now Hushai advises Absalom. And this is where it becomes a little difficult to discern between the two, right? So starting in verse 5. Then Absalom said to Hushai, the Archite, also, and let us hear what he has to say. When Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom said to him, thus has Ahithophel spoken. Shall we do as he says? If not, you speak. Then Hushai said to Absalom, this time the counsel of Ahithophel has given is not good. Hushai said, you know that your father and his men are mighty men, and that they are enraged, like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. Besides, your father is expert in war. He will not spend the night with the people. Behold, even now he has hidden himself in one of the pits or in some other place. And as soon as some of the people fall at the first attack, whoever hears it will say, there has been a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. Even the valiant man, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, they will utterly melt with fear. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and that those who are with him are valiant men. But my counsel is that all Israel be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as the sand by the sea for multitude, and that you go to battle in person. So we shall come upon him in some place where he is to be found, and we shall light on him as the dew falls on the ground. And of him and all his men with him, not one will be left. If he withdraws into a city, then all Israel will bring ropes to that city, and we shall drag into that city, that valley, until not even a pebble is there to be found. And Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the counsel of Hushai, the Archite, is better than the counsel of Ahithophel. For the Lord has ordained to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel, so the Lord might bring harm upon Absalom. So, pretty interesting advice. Really the opposite, isn't it? You have one man that says, strike now, let's go. We got to catch him off balance and take him out. The other one is unify the country. That's not bad. It's not a bad idea. You know, get everyone on your side. Get yourself established. Bring everybody in. And you're going to have more than 12,000. And whenever you do, man alive, you're going to be able to just walk up there and you'll get him no matter where he goes. And he's not going to be able to get out from under it. That idea that he draws like a rope going through is like a net, a seine net. Chelsea says, sounds like he's describing God and Jesus. Ahithophel's plan sounds like the adversary's plan if we are to know what he was up to. There is some similarities. When we look at this, we will compare as we start to go back and look at this. you're right. So this, the other plan, two plans, strike now, other one, hold off. And he brings up, I think the way he says this is really wise. He brings a little bit of fear into Absalom by saying, you know your father is a mighty man. This is the guy. Now, he didn't say this, but he's probably, maybe if he's smart, going, this is the guy that stood and brought down Goliath. This is the guy that has never lost a battle. And he was a little boy, but Absalom was a little boy whenever he took out the Philistines in two incredible battles where he was way outnumbered. David has never lost a battle. And every one of those men have been with him from the beginning. And they are enraged. You want to go poke them? Let them calm down. Let them get that out. They're not as easy to provoke. They're not going to be, let them calm down and you get your act together. Then, and I think the other wise thing here is he's saying, you need to go. Now remember, one of these men, Ahithophel, is not speaking for God any longer. Hushai is. And it says right there, the last part, it says that this is what the Lord had ordained to defeat the good counsel.
I mean, God allowed them both to speak, but he knew what the end result was going to be. And he allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
He allowed them both to say, okay, let me whisper in your ear, let me whisper in your ear. Yeah, go ahead and take this one's advice and just see what happens. But Absalom should have known that his father is not going to be sitting there sleeping with his men.
Yeah, he's not. He's not going to be sitting around. You're not going to be able to walk into that camp and just strike him.
Like Saul.
This is a guy that knows where to find caves.
Right.
You're not going to just sneak in and get him. And that's neat because we're going to see the way that he attacks. It's brilliant. So the other thing is the way that he tells him, you know, you need to be there.
Yeah.
Now, I've got a question. If both of them had really good advice, which honestly they do, now one of them has the extra hand of God with it, and it's going to be fulfilled because that's God's blessing, but both of them are very wise. Now, not knowing that God is inspiring one or the other, because as far as you know, they're both inspired, if you're Absalom. Which one, honestly, should you follow? Ahithophel. He's been with you from the beginning of the rebellion. This guy's got more skin in the game than Hushai. Hushai is friends with your dad. He wasn't a part of the plan. He's not the one that said, yeah, let's do it. We can do it. I mean, if I had to cut it fine, I think I would lean towards, towards the advice of strike now. But we know that there's a little more going on in motivating this as well. So let's go now to the defeat, because we see that he does follow after Hushai's advice. This is where we're going to jump through a little bit. One of the things that is interesting is the way that whenever Ahithophel decides that his advice is not going to be followed, in verse 23, gets on his donkey, goes home, hangs himself. And then we see David going, when he finds out what's going on, he maneuvers, and he's going over to the city of Mahanaim, which I talked about. That's where Ishbosheth was installed as king after Saul died, and Abner took him there and set him up, and it's on the east side of the Jordan in kind of a rough terrain, very easy. One thing that as well that we see that Absalom does, that he doesn't have the same type of man to lead, and that is Amasa is in command of the troops. So Joab is with David, and I don't think for a minute that Absalom would let Joab lead his troops. Why? One, Joab wouldn't give him the time of day when he came back. The only reason Joab negotiated and was able to talk David into allowing Absalom to come back was because Joab was caring about the way the king was functioning. And he wanted the king to function and get out of the stupor because he'd been separated from Absalom so long. And then whenever Joab is able to bring him and goes and brings him back, he doesn't talk to him for 2 years, and Absalom has to go catch his field on fire, burn it, and then Joab comes and says, wait, what'd you burn my field down for? Because I can't get your attention. Get me an audience with my father. And I would be afraid of Joab if I was Absalom. I think there's a little bit that's fearful. So as they start to set up and to prepare both sides for battle, this is where we see that in chapter 18 and 2, where he then organizes the troop into 3 basic divisions, 1/3. Each one of them he puts in charge are extremely capable men, warriors, part of the men of valor, and he divides them up. He basically is going to do what you call a 3-prong attack. That allows you the ability to manage them, especially if you think about the type of communications. You didn't have radios, you didn't have cell phones. It's on foot, so whenever if they were to all engage as one force on force, you have a lot less maneuverability. You don't have the opportunity to press them on multiple sides and cause a collapse. They know where you're coming from, and you're all frontal. So by dividing into 3 forces, it's going to cause Absalom's forces to have to react. If one side of David's troop, 1/3 of them start to collapse, the others then can come and reinforce. So you have a lot of maneuverability. This is really brilliant what he does in dividing them into thirds. One of the things he tells them, though, be kind to my son. Don't kill him. And we know that's not what's going to happen. We know that eventually what happens in the battle, we read that the battle ensues and 20,000 are killed. Now, it doesn't say which side, but I imagine that the majority of all those were on the side of Absalom. But 20,000, think about that. 20,000 in one battle. We lost 58,000 in Vietnam over a 10-year period. They lost 20,000 in one battle. And now these battles could last up to 9 to 10 hours, but pretty much sun up to sundown. Sun go down, they would break off. But we're still looking at 20,000 died because of this rebellion. And it's brother on brother. It's like the Civil War, where you had families killing each other because of what side they were on, if they were on the Confederate or on the Union side. So it's not like they're fighting Gentiles. They're not fighting and killing. It wasn't 20,000 Philistines. That's what I think is also a tragic part of this consequences of this. So let's look at 2. We're going to look at some lessons of this as we bring this together and from what I call a rebellious son. Let's first look at the father. One of the things that I see, there's 3 things that we're going to look at that I see in this, that it's applicable both ways. I want us to look at it as God the Father and David the Father, the shadowing of both. And also, we know that David, in a sense, was a shadow of Christ to come, the more perfect, in a sense of the ruling king. But when we look at this, we see a father's love in this story. As horrible as it is, it happens. We as parents, as horrible as we've had different things with our children, and some have had some much worse situations happen with their parents, between parents and children. But there is always, no matter how angry, unless you have such a heart that's so seared and evil to begin with, which there are people out there, parents like that. That's right. But a normal parent, no matter how angry they get, there's a love there. Amen. There's just a love there. And and I think it's the basis of agape. It's not the one that, you feel good about them. It's the one where you always want the best for them. No matter what they're doing, where they're at in your relationship, you have this agape love, that you want the outcome to always be the best. And that's what I see in here in this father's love. And that's what the devotion. As much as we see the problems that David has as being a father, we see that he still has that devotion. Whenever Absalom murdered his brother and took off and was separated, we see David's devotion to Absalom during that separation. Maybe he didn't respond correctly when he came back, but he still was devoted. The other thing, you never hear about any of David's children being neglected. His family was taken care of. As disaster and chaotic as it was with all the wives and concubines and children, I do believe, looking at David, he gave them the best. And sometimes maybe that's too much. But you have a strong devotion. And this is what we see with God. God has a devotion to us. He is faithful to us in spite of our faithfulness, and I'm so thankful for that. That God's faithfulness does not depend on mine. And because we know our faith breaks, that we sin, we turn away, we rebel. We do exactly the Absalom, don't we? And so we have that understanding that, yes, you have the love, you're still going to experience these. Just because we understand all of this, it doesn't mean we're going to escape the problems in our families.
Amen.
But I think we need to understand that we have to hold on to that agape for our children.
Amen.
And sometimes it's hard, isn't it?
Yes.
Sometimes it's hard. But that's what God has done for us.
Yep.
Don't we hear this all the time? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son so that nobody should perish.
Yep.
That's agape. That he did not send his son when he liked us. He sent his son while we were still enemies of his. And that's what I see David doing. Even when his son was trying to kill him, what did he tell his men? Don't kill him.
Yep.
Don't kill him. Now, one of the most horrific deaths, I think, was Absalom's.
Right.
It's ironic that the arrogance of him, his beautiful hair that he described as his demise. But for him to hang there like that and then have Joab come up, he reprimands one of the soldiers who have found him. Why haven't you killed him? That's the type of man Joab is.
He's a warrior.
He is a bloodied warrior, isn't he? And he doesn't just kill him, stab him once. 3 times he drives a stake or a spear through him.
Yeah.
So how would you like to have your son done like that? I don't care how mean, and ugly it's gotten between my sons, that even if we were still on the outs, that would hurt.
Amen. Sure would.
And that's what we see, that devotion that David, when he heard the news, he was extremely emotional and upset, genuinely broke his heart to see that. I think, though, that David understood that this was a necessary outcome. And I think very similar to the way that God removed David from having to be involved in the death of Saul and protected him, I think this is a way of him being protected. Remember, his men did not want him to go to battle. Now, they had a strategic reason, which made sense, but I think this is another part of God pulling him back, keeping him away from the battlefield, and that God, you remember what it said about the advice, so that harm could come? God intended harm to Absalom. And David wasn't going to like it. God intended to kill Saul through the Philistines. And David didn't necessarily like it. So Chelsea says, the love of your enemy, a love your enemy moment. Yeah. I feel this in how David was with Saul as well. is what Jesus meant with that. It's awesome how we are given example in the Old Testament if we don't know how to exact. It is. That's what I love about the Old Testament. These stories we look at all the time. We see this horrible story about this rebellious son, and yet we are the Absaloms. We are. We are the Davids. When we're a parent and we see these things happening, we're the parent who has committed sins that sometimes when we see the consequences are starting to come back in our family, that if we don't take action, what's going to happen, right? And that's what he did. When Tamar was raped, what did he do? He got mad. When Amnon was killed, what did he do? Nothing.
Right.
When his son was prancing around the city, going to the city gate to the elders, and rolling down in the chariot with men straddling beside it, I'm sorry. I think somebody would have went and told David, hey, you know what Absalom's doing? So don't tell me, David. I think that's one thing. He may have been able to cover up the conspiracy, but I think his actions inside the city, he saw. He did nothing. So there's a part here that we as parents, yes, okay, maybe there's some consequences of our sinful upbringing or whatever it may have been that now is affecting people that we love around us. Doesn't mean we have the right to just lay back and go, well, this is on me. No. And that's where God comes in. Because justice is going to happen, isn't it? We see a father's discipline that was lacking that I kind of started talking about, where he didn't discipline. Now, discipline isn't just spanking, even though that's what I thought when I was growing up. Seemed like the only time I got disciplined was the backside of a belt or something, right? But it's, well, there were other things that were training, because the discipline is training.
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes, like when I was in Army basic training, that disciplining was push-ups, marching, it was more than that. And so sometimes we limit it down to just a corporal type of punishment, but it wasn't. It's all of it. And that's what we see in the Proverbs 13:24. The proverb writer says, whoever spares the rod hates his son. Hates. But he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. That's the thing that we look at that sometimes, we go, rod? I mean, you can't even use a soft sandal on a kid today. Oh man, you're going to have CPS all over you. They're going to be in your house. They're going to be looking at your shoes. They're going to take, backside prints off your shoes and try to figure out, oh boy. I see that a problem in our society today.
Yeah, that's amen.
Cindy says, David certainly spared the rod with dire consequences. Absolutely. And it's happening in our society, isn't it? And it's biblical. It's not just biblical, it's common sense. We've seen it in families, and we've seen it in societies where there's no training, no consequences, no boundaries. They're feral. What we're creating is a feral society. It's like wild dogs and cats, and they can do whatever they want, and the strongest wins, survival of the fittest and stuff like that.
Whatever makes them feel good, it's okay.
Whatever makes you feel good is what you want. It's relative to what makes you feel good. That's an animal, that's not us. That's not the way our Creator made us. And there's no peace in that. There's no comfort. There's no solace.
There's no end to it either.
What's that?
There's no end to it. Someone who is allowed to just run wild, they just continue to run wild.
They'll continue to devour, won't they? They'll continue to devour. Absolutely.
Well, I like the fact that you said, brother, that discipline does not always have to be in the form of a belt or of a person just being spanked, period. There's ways that you can discipline your children, and like you say, you don't have to use a belt or just whatever, just say any type of spanking material to raise your children. In my home, my mother and father, they didn't raise us like that. We didn't always get the belt to us. We had moments where we would sit down and we would talk to make things to be an understanding to us, to give us a better understanding of what we was doing wrong. And so it helped us to always be like, well, we didn't get a whooping this time, but it still didn't mean that what we did was not right. We still know what we did was wrong.
Yeah, it established a boundary, didn't it? It established a standard.
Authority also.
Yep.
Chelsea says sometimes a rod is just telling your kids the truth of things. Hopefully, you're that lucky and you catch on quick. And that's right. You know, that's another part. I got smart, like Pavlov's dog, you know. I figured out real quick that, you know, after so long, I would do what my dad said, and I got a lot less pain.
Yeah.
And I remember, I tell you, I still think my grandpa used that razor strap on me multiple times, but everybody's told me, no, he never touched you. I'm like, what? No way. Because I know he had that razor strap, and then I started thinking about it, and I go, you know what? I don't think I ever did see it. But I sure heard that name a lot. He would say, you go, boy, I'm going to get that razor strap.
The fear of the world.
I didn't even know what a razor strap meant, but I was scared because I knew what it meant, though.
That's what I'm saying, just the fear of
I didn't know the meaning of, you know, that's what you use for a razor, but it was frightening, and that controlled me. And that's right. I mean, you know, hopefully that's what we do. We learn consequences.
And sometimes also having great examples before will also teach you. If you grew up in a home where there's multiple kids, like in our home, there was 8 of us, all we had to do was just be observant and pay attention, like, okay, well, I ain't coming in at 8:01. I'm coming in at 7:58. Lesson learned. Just,
Yeah, I'm glad I had an older brother and sister.
Yep,
I got to see a lot of do's and don'ts.
yep, same here.
Right? You saw that. And that's a part of the love. You know, if you have this fatherly love, you're going to do some things that isn't going to feel good. And that's the way God is.
Yep.
Do you think God, what do you think it says? That none should perish.
That's right, that's right.
And yet it was when we were enemies. And yet there's going to be a judgment. There's going to be consequences. In Proverbs 15:5 also, a fool spurns a parent's discipline, but whoever heeds correction shows prudence.
Amen.
We see people that sometimes, instead of learning the lesson, like what you were saying, you know, I figured that out real quick, didn't you? You figured it out. And you learn. We learn from our suffering through whether it's life experiences that discipline us,
Yep.
death, tragedy. Those things discipline us. They train us. They teach us to be able to endure and to learn how to manipulate and handle and not go through it. I remember watching my boys grow up, and it was like every, you know, they would have this, to them, was the most traumatic moment in their life. And I remember having this idea, and I thought, you know what it's like to them? It's like the problem that they're facing the first time is like they're going into like a train going into a tunnel. And as far as they can see, there is no light at the end. That train does not come out at the end. And so when they're in the middle of that tunnel or that problem and they're suffering through it and everything, they believe that's the end of it. But eventually, what happens? You get out of that tunnel. One way or another, the train goes through. And hopefully the next time you enter that dark spot, you go, wait a minute, I know it may be longer, it may be darker, but I'm going to get through it. There's light on the other end of that. And it trains us. All these different things God has put into place to make us better. So, in Revelations, he talks about it in 3:19. Those whom I love, what? I rebuke and I discipline them.
That's right.
And so the warning is, I'm going to do it. So what? Repent. Change your ways before I have to do this, is what the message was to them. The third thing is direction. Providing direction for children, providing direction for our families. David lacked that. God does it. God has given us very clear direction in our lives and shows us. In Psalms 32:8, the psalmist says, you know, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Now, what's interesting is David wrote this psalm. And this is believed to be one of those dual types of application to where this could be God speaking, which it is, but the other part of this is David wrote it. And I do believe this, but and of course we bring this into the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. And Paul writing there, he says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Give them direction. We're lacking a lot of direction today in our families. We look at a son's rebellion. We look at Absalom, and the first thing we see vengeance. He had vengeance from the start, and we know that that is a dangerous emotion. That when you see somebody that is vengeful, wanting to get even because somehow they've been insulted, been injured, there's a difference between justice and vengeance. You know, there's a big difference, and sometimes people really murk that up. They think that I'm getting justice. No, you're getting vengeance. Only true justice comes from God. Justice comes from the way that God has established law and order, and you don't take that on your own. And that's exactly what he did. The irony is, he was so vengeful about what happened to his sister, Tamar, when she was raped, that he took it in his own hands and he killed his brother. Now, vengeance should have been all the other family wanting him killed. Law and justice should have been his death. Isn't he lucky it didn't happen to him? See how it fits? As long as it's good for me, it's okay. As long as it's my vengeance, but when it's yours, no, that's not right. And I think that's kind of the irony in all of this. Vengeance has just flooded across all of his ability to think and his arrogance with it. Because see, arrogance and vengeance, I think, go hand in hand. I see people who are very arrogant, proud. And so it doesn't take much if you don't kiss the ring.
That's right.
Oh, whoa.
Yep.
They're injured, they're insulted, they're humiliated. And they're the ones that will go for vengeance.
Yep.
They want revenge. Because you've insulted me, you hurt me, you did something to me. That's the opposite of God. It's the opposite of love. It's the opposite of being a Christian.
Amen.
Leviticus 19:18 says, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbors as yourself. I am the Lord." So that's what he was under. That's what Absalom should have been taught. Should have been given direction. Should have been enforced. And that was according to the old law. That didn't change, did it? Look at Hebrews 10:30. It says there, "For we know him who said, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay.' And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of God." You think it's fearful for people to fall into your hands? You ain't nothing.
Amen.
You fall into God's hands.
Amen.
So, you know what? I think God can do a better job at it than I can. So let's stay out of God's business.
Amen.
Let's let God do it. 1 Corinthians 13:18. Let no one deceive himself. We look at deception. The next part, vengeance and deception. He deceived himself in thinking he was righteous. You know, let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in his age, let him become a fool, that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly with man, with God. That's where arrogance, again, causes you to be deceived. And that's what I see here. And we know that the children of Israel as well, they were very, very rebellious in their rebellion. So what's rebellion? When you talk about rebel, going against.
I was going to say counterintuitive to what is right.
Counterintuitive, what is right. You're going right the opposite. And I just kept thinking about the children of Israel and how that they were so rebellious. And the Hebrew writer is kind of reminding Christians of that fact that, you know, for who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all of those who left Egypt and led by Moses?
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them. They're the ones who saw the Red Sea divided. They're the ones that saw all the plagues and the power of God strike Egypt down. They're the ones who saw manna come down from the sky. They're the ones that saw God's presence by day and by night. And they rebelled. And that scares me. Those three things: vengeance, deception, and rebellion. We are all a little bit of an Absalom in this. And we're a little bit of David when it comes to our relationship as well. So any closing thoughts? Did I miss something here? Excuse me. Well, Chelsea says, that goes to God's correction too. When he corrects us, we are to love it and be grateful, because without it, we'd be in bad shape. Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, I think of the discipline of when I started out showing up there at basic training and how hard it was. Oh my, they were horrible, they were mean, they were yelling at us, they made us cry. And then, boy, when we graduated and we were in those khaki browns, starch uniforms, and we're marching to our graduation, and we were doing drill and ceremony, I looked around. Well, I couldn't really look around because I get yelled at, but I just couldn't help but think about who I used to be before I was disciplined. And that's the way we should be as Christians,
Amen.
is looking around and seeing what God is doing to help us.
Amen.
He says, I rebuke those whom I love. Don't take it personal. Well, hey, we've had some great interaction online here. Like I said, I'm going to take the audio from this, upload it to the podcast on Podbean. It's an application you can download for free. And like I said, you can click on that little QR code. It'll load you right over to those. And then this will be one of the, well, like the third one. The other two are kind of small in files. One of them is an introduction to what we're doing on Friday mornings, the Bible podcast. So I hope that if you can join us Friday morning at 10 o'clock, we'd love to have you interact with us. Yeah, well, I don't know. Chelsea says, thanks, Ron. An hour's too short almost, haha.
Yeah.
Well, that, yeah, I know. I have to look. I got a clock up there on the back of the wall there, so I keep watching to make sure I'm not, and I'm already over, and I'm winding it back, you know, trying to wind it back. One man told me one time as a preacher, he said, I'm going to get you a calendar. And I go, what for? He goes, so you can hang it on the back of the building. Going to take that clock down. I said, boy, that hurt. So appreciate you thinking that an hour's not enough. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, and we'll continue the study of the life of David.